Today, we will talk about Minnesota, the resume to this point of the Golden Gophers. A team, are they inside the top 100 in Ken Pom and Bart Torvik? To be determined. No, they are not. We'll talk about the resume. We'll talk about their offense and defense. We do have a banger bet. I have officially placed some money on this game. Why am I doing it? I don't know. While the BIP has been on several games this year outside of Ohio State that I've used personally, for Ohio State games, it doesn't get it. However, I'm still trusting it for this game, and I'm using a little bit of my own kind of, I wouldn't say gut, but the research I've done and just the eye test. So we'll talk about that here later on, and then, of course, at the end, we've got some predictions and a game pick as well in this one. If you haven't subscribed already, please do, wherever you're getting your podcast. Subscribe on YouTube. We're almost to 100 subscribers already. We just started with the YouTube content, so please get there and subscribe. Even if you don't watch anything on YouTube, or if you take in this show on podcast form, please get there, Views from the Shop podcast on YouTube, and subscribe just to help the numbers there. And give a 5-star review as well wherever you listen to podcasts. Those winners have received DMs as of last night. So congrats to those two who won their $25 Raising Cane's gift cards. All right, so the Buckeyes will take on Minnesota tonight. There are some numbers already out from Vegas. We'll talk about that. Ohio State is favored in this one. I haven't even checked to see if there's been any movement on this number since last night when I first looked at it, but I'll look at it right now just to set the scene for you here. As Ohio State, yes, that number has actually moved, although these numbers are very weird and not loading the way that I would like. So we're seeing 5.5 right now. Ohio State is favored by, I don't really know how accurate that number is because this app is kind of bugging with me, and I don't really appreciate that. All that to say, Buckeyes are favored. Buckeyes are expected to get back on track here against Michigan State, and there's a few reasons for that. We'll talk about that, but Minnesota as a team in general, not a program I've really respected on this show, and heading into this season, they lost a lot of talent out of the portal. They kept Mike Mitchell Jr. I thought that he entered the portal and then returned. I didn't care enough to go check, but outside of that, Cam Christie said, I'm going to go to the NBA. And then maybe he did, maybe he didn't, I don't know, but he's not at Minnesota. Joshua Olu-Joseph, also gone. Pharrell Payne, gone. Elijah Hawkins, who I think led the NCAA or came close to it, led the NCAA near that in assists last season for Minnesota, also gone as well. So the Golden Gophers, they have lost a lot of talent, and they've tried to replace it. It hasn't really gone all that well. They're ranked 119th in Ken Pom, 132nd in Bart Torvik as of right now. The Buckeyes, where are they at in Ken Pom? I know Bart Torvik, they're kind of dropping. I think they're 42nd-ish in Bart Torvik, and they're 30th in Ken Pom right now. So the Buckeyes obviously ranked very comfortably ahead in the analytics world. Now, they're 8-6. Their most notable non-conference game came against North Texas. Ohio State has played Auburn and Kentucky and Pitt and Texas A&M. You would have to go to, Indiana State. I don't know who the 6th best team is that Ohio State has faced. It may still be better than the hardest team Minnesota faced in the non-conference. They played North Texas, and they lost. And they scored 51 points in that game. They lost 54-51. They also lost to Wake Forest, and they lost to Wichita State in the non-conference. So anytime they had even the most minor of tests in the non-conference, they ended up losing. They have scored over 80 points one singular time this year. That was against Morgan State. Morgan State is the 13th worst team in the nation, according to Ken Pom. And Minnesota has played 3 Big Ten games this year. They've lost all 3 to Purdue, to Indiana, and to Michigan State. In those games combined, they have led for a total of 7 minutes. They led for 4 minutes against Purdue. They led for 2 minutes against Indiana and 1 entire minute. I think the total was 144 against Michigan State. And on average, they are losing by 18 points so far this season in Big Ten play. 2 of those games even played at home. So this is a team with the 238th strongest strength of schedule right now, and any games that they have been tested in the non-conference, even if they were the tiniest of tests, they have lost, and they have lost every single game in Big Ten play. So, Ohio State, you're looking at them coming off a loss against Michigan State on Friday night, a game that you felt it was winnable, but Ohio State just couldn't get the job done. They kept it close. They made a valiant effort. They had a strong comeback. They took the lead somehow in the second half and just couldn't hold on. Michigan State was the better team. Ohio State looking to get another win in on their record, another win in Big Ten play, I guess is what I really care about. And against Minnesota, it would help. It's been hard for Big Ten teams to win on the road this season. It's been tough at times for Ohio State to beat Minnesota. If you go back and look year by year, Ohio State playing at Minnesota, not all that great, especially given the caliber of program Ohio State has been compared to the caliber of program that Minnesota has been. However, this is shaping up to be a game that Ohio State should win. At the same time, Vegas does not really like Ohio State that much, just 5.5-ish. 4.5 is what I saw last night. I'll open up the app later on to see if I get a better number there. But Buckeyes favored. Let's talk about the Minnesota offense. Oh boy. Minnesota is averaging 67.4 points per game. Mind you, they're averaging 67.4 points per game with the 238th best strength of schedule in college basketball this season. So, the Golden Gophers, even when not playing good teams, struggle to score. They've got 107.4 offensive rating. That's not necessarily horrible, but the pace is 359th in the NCAA. I don't remember what that – I actually do have that here. 62.2 pace. So you think Ohio State plays slow. You'd rather see Ohio State run a little bit more. Not even close to Minnesota. 107.4 offensive rating. They make 45% of their field goal attempts, and they're just 30% from the three-point line. Of all Power 5 teams in college basketball this season, Minnesota is averaging the third least points per game this year. Seton Hall and Virginia are the only two teams averaging less points per game in the Power 5 other than Minnesota. Power 5, of course, at this point comprised of the Big Ten, the SEC, the ACC, and the Big East and the Big 12. I guess you can throw the Pac-12 in there as well with the two teams that they have. I think that's kind of still a thing. I don't really even know. So there's that. The Minnesota offense has not been impressive. There has been one bright spot, and it is Dawson Garcia. Dawson Garcia has been playing great basketball for Minnesota for 3 years now. This season, he's averaging 19 points per game, 2 assists per game, 7 rebounds per game, and he's making 58% of his shots within the three-point line and 36% of his shots outside of the three-point line. Dawson Garcia can score from just about anywhere. He's also absolutely excellent at getting to the free throw line. He's among the best in the nation. He's averaging 5 fouls drawn per game, which helps him get to the line 6.6 on average times per game this season. Now, his free throw shooting is solid, not necessarily great. He's 79.6% from the free throw line this season. So that'd be a lot more impressive if you could get that up to 85, closer to 90%. That's basically what Minnesota needs from Dawson Garcia because it cannot score basically outside of Garcia. So Garcia, he's skilled, he's good, he's eaten up Ohio State in the past, and he's really, really good at getting to the free throw line, which means Sean Stewart, Aaron Bradshaw, Devin Royal, whoever will be guarding Dawson Garcia in the paint at the rim, and even outside of the paint at the three-point line, they're going to have to be aware that he is very, very capable of drawing those fouls. And again, he will shoot from anywhere. He's the best and he's the most active at the rim, 70% field goal percentage at the rim this season. That's really, really solid. And he takes 41% of his field goal attempts there. So out of every 5 field goal attempts he takes, about 2 come from the rim area, layups, dunks, all those types of things. He takes more mid-range shots than most, and he's above average there at 44% from the mid-range. And again, he's a 36% shooter from the three-point line. So he shoots at all 3 levels, and he scores at all 3 levels too for Minnesota. And historically, he loves to play Ohio State. You go all the way back to his sophomore season, he had 28 points against Ohio State. That was a season high for him in that season. And then last year, 36 points in that December game in the shot that Minnesota lost. He nearly got to 40 points in that game, and he had 22 points at home in Minnesota's late season win over Ohio State last year. That was a game just like this season, actually. Ohio State played Michigan State. I know that game was at Michigan State last year, but Michigan State and then Minnesota. That is the pattern Ohio State has enjoyed schedule-wise. So 28 points, 36 points, and 22 points for Dawson Garcia. I'm taking so much time talking about Dawson Garcia because he is the focal point of the offense and really the only thing that's going and working this year for Ben Johnson at Minnesota offensively. So if you're in a state that can bet player props, just be advised. He's averaging 19 points per game, and he scored at least 22 points or more and gotten up to even 36 and 28 in the 3 games that he's played against Ohio State with Minnesota. So just be advised on that. Now, this Minnesota team, another good thing that they've got going for them offensively, just like last year, they share the ball really, really well. They're 8th in the NCAA in assist rate at 64.7%. So about 65% of made shots from the field are coming off of assists. So they share the ball, they move the ball well. They average 16 assists per game, which is really good. It would be a lot better if they had a higher pace. But that assist rate you see much better than the assist per game numbers, so they can share the ball. And on the other end, not only do they share the ball, they take care of the ball as well, only averaging 9.8 turnovers per game this season. Again, it's a really, really slow pace when you talk about that Minnesota offense, but they've got good numbers nonetheless. Lasai Patterson, 3.9 assists per game. Mike Mitchell Jr., 3.4 assists per game. And Femi Odukale, I think is how it's pronounced, Odukale, 3.3 assists per game for Minnesota. And on the flip side, again, only one player is averaging more than 2.0 turnovers per game. I think that was Mike Mitchell Jr., and I think he was at just 2.1 or 2.2 turnovers per game. So Ohio State, as they go into this game against Minnesota, they're going to be aware, I'm sure, of they've got to keep their heads on a swivel when it comes to these assist numbers, things like that. They're also likely not going to be able to force a lot of turnovers in this one. However, Michigan State takes care of the basketball. They just forced 16 turnovers against them, so we will see. And a couple other points on the Minnesota offense. It's not a three-point shooting team. Again, they're 30.1% as a team from behind the three-point line this season. Here's a really awful number for you. So I tweeted last night just some numbers that I had uncovered when it comes to Minnesota. That got some comments from some people, but also a bunch of likes as well. Let me find that real quick. I've already said some of these. 67 points per game. That's third worst in Power 5. Scored over 80 points in one game this season. They led for a total of, I have a typo there, but I'm not going to fix it. I don't care enough. Led for a total of 7 minutes combined against Purdue, Indiana, Michigan State. Actually, I put 5 minutes on the tweet, my bad. And a minus 18 per game margin of loss in Big Ten games. Here's another one for you that I did not add to that tweet. They shot 26% or worse from the three-point line in 9 of 14 games this season. That is absolutely brutal three-point shooting from this team. So Dawson Garcia, he shoots a lot of threes. He makes a respectable amount at 36%. You've got Patterson. You've got Mitchell. You've also got Brennan Rigsby there, who will shoot a bunch of threes. Outside of Mitchell, who's shooting 42%, Patterson and Rigsby are both 22% from the three-point line this season. They're all shooting at least 4 3-point attempts per game or more. So you got some really good with Mitchell and with Garcia, and then you've got some really, really bad as well. So this is not a good three-point shooting team. Again, you look at these numbers, and this is kind of why we look at the numbers that Vegas gives us as well. It paints a path for how should this game go. Vegas is expecting this to be a very low-scoring game. On top of that, if you're watching this game and Minnesota starts hitting some threes, you're going to have to start getting nervous if you're Ohio State, because Minnesota's doing something that they haven't traditionally been good at, so they're finding extra points compared to how they normally find points. So if that's the case in this one, if Ohio State is just giving up 3-pointers against Minnesota, if they made 5 threes in the first half, you start to get a little concerned about Ohio State's ability to win this basketball game. Now, on the flip side, if they're a bad 3-point shooting team, that means they score a lot in the paint, right? Well, 47% of their points come from the painted area this season, but that's only because of how bad they are at shooting the three. They're only 38% in the paint this season is Minnesota. That is absolutely awful. That's really, really bad. They're 65% at the rim. That's like about as average as it gets. And these numbers are not going to make Mr. Goldie Gopher blush there in this game. Minnesota, I love their colors. I love the mascot. It's unique. They just can't get it together when it comes to athletics. Maybe there's a secondary or tertiary sport they're really good at. Football, basketball, not it. So all that to say, not a good team in the paint, not a good 3-point shooting team. They don't turn the ball over. It doesn't really matter when you can't make shots. And plenty of other metrics that we've seen so far show, well, not a great team Ohio State will be facing in this one. And by the way, I've decided I don't want to go through the effort of finding. If you remember in the season preview series, I combined the betting odds for Big Ten winner from like 4 different sports books, I believe, and Minnesota was in its own tier at the bottom. They were in their own tier. The worst odds to win the Big Ten. I imagine those odds are even worse now. So not a team that had high expectations coming in. I would assume, Ben Johnson's been there, 3-4 years now? At some point, right? It's time? I don't know. Maybe not. Defensively for Minnesota, good for them. They're allowing 65 points per game. Great job, Minnesota. Defense, that's only 2 points less than their offense is scoring. 103.7 defensive rating isn't really all that great. 43% from the field and 34% from the 3-point line. So they will give up some 3-pointers. They are absolute paint protectors. Very similar to Michigan State. Teams are only 58% at the rim and 31% in the paint this season. This Minnesota team will defend the paint like its life depends on it. Teams are only shooting 47% from inside the arc as well, and they can block shots. That kind of goes hand in hand with defending the rim and the paint. They've got a 14.7% block rate. That is 95th percentile in college basketball. Parker Fox, not a name we mentioned yet. I don't know what year he is, but he's been there at least for 2 there at Minnesota. I feel like he's been there for maybe 7. It's hard to say. 1.4 blocks per game for him. Odukale, 1.3 blocks per game for him, and Dawson Garcia at 1.1 there for Minnesota. So they do have some shot blockers. And then you go into the games against Purdue and Michigan State and Indiana. Purdue is only 59% at the rim against Minnesota. They were 40% in the paint. Those numbers not great. Michigan State did gash them at 77% at the rim. They only had 6 field goal attempts in the paint, so we don't really care about that. And knowing Indiana, they better have really taken care of Minnesota in the paint and at the rim because not a great 3-point shooting team. They were 75% at the rim, and they were 75% in the paint. So in Big Ten games this season, Minnesota, they handled Purdue, at least in that regard, even though they lost by 20-ish points against Indiana, against Michigan State. Those teams were able to get through Minnesota's very, very strong, but apparently penetrable rim and paint defense. Now, on the flip side, giving up threes, 34% season long are 3-point shooters against Minnesota so far this season. And then again, we look at Big Ten games. Purdue shot 44%. Obviously, that's a great number. You'll take that every single day of the week. Indiana shot 28%, but it's not that bad given it's Indiana. I think Indiana's around like 32% this season. So not an awful number. It's just a 1-game sample size. But you put this together, Michigan State shot 50% against Minnesota. So 3 games in the Big Ten where we have seen the strengths Minnesota has defensively, maybe not necessarily strengths. So that's the Minnesota offense, and that's the Minnesota defense. We've got banger bets to look at, which means I need to see if we've got updated numbers here because I do want to make sure that we're being careful about that. I can give you numbers from last night, though. The total was set at 133.5. Here we go. And the spread was set at Ohio State -4.5. I'm seeing no real change here. Still Ohio State -4.5. You can get that at BetMGM. You've also got Ohio State +5.5 on Caesars. And then the total, 137.5 on FanDuel. You can get 136.5 on ESPN Bet. What did the Views from the Shot podcast, betting intelligence platform, tell us for this game? Well, the total was set at just 133.5. The BIP sees this game as being very, very low scoring. Ohio State maybe touching 70 points, but probably not. So seeing a low total in this one because you look at the pace of Ohio State, you look at the pace of Minnesota, two very, very slow teams, and Minnesota just not a good offense. So the BIP would see this as a low scoring game. And then the BIP actually has Ohio State -6.5 in this one. Again, you're looking at -4.5 and potentially a 5.5 number there as well. The BIP does like Ohio State at -6.5 in this one. So before we get into a pick, just be advised, those are the numbers we've got. So you could get maybe an over if you like that, or sorry, an under if you like that, is what I mean to say. The number's set at 137.5 on FanDuel. You can get that -110. The total we see in this one is 133.5. This would qualify. So far this year, the totals have been there more so than the spread from the BIP for Ohio State games. So in this one, you definitely could take under 137.5. I'm not going to declare that as a banger bet, even though we have a 4-point edge. Usually I'll declare a banger bet at 3 points, get an entire point here. Not going to take it. I don't trust the BIP when it comes to Ohio State games. I'm sorry, I don't. However, we do have a banger bet. So before we get into that, let's talk about predictions and a pick in this one. So the biggest question for Ohio State, coming off a game against Michigan State where they could not score in the paint. They couldn't score at the rim. Can they do that against a very similar defense in Minnesota? So Ohio State, they were 64% at the rim. They were 31% in the paint. That's just not good enough. Not even close to good enough to win games. Those were their numbers against Michigan State, and it led to only 62 points. Michigan State, this is a weird stat that I found this year, but I'm going to keep taking it. Thanks to Ken Palm. 59th in average height is Michigan State. Minnesota is back at 90th. So you have a difference there in height. So that's something that bothered Ohio State, is just the length and the wingspan that Michigan State possesses. That's maybe not going to be quite as big of a deal when Ohio State plays Minnesota. That's the number one thing. Outside of that, Ohio State can make threes. We know that. Minnesota will allow threes. So is this going to be a game that John Mobley Jr. can be really good? I think John Mobley Jr., he might be starting for the rest of this season. Beachy Johnson Jr., again, you got to prepare for him to not return to Ohio State. I think at this point that is a possibility. And if that's the case, John Mobley Jr., he can make threes and he can start. And I think even if Beachy Johnson Jr. does come back, I think John Mobley Jr. will continue to start. This is a game where he could feast. He could eat up. Can Bruce Thornton hit a couple of threes? Will you get more from Micah Parrish, maybe hitting a couple of threes? This could be a game where Ohio State could get out to like a 14-4 lead, and they just never look back. This could also be a game where it's neck and neck the entire way. Who knows with this Ohio State team? I've been wrong on Ohio State several times, but I've come to the conclusion of this. Ohio State's front court is not good enough. When they have to play teams like Michigan State with really, really strong front courts who want to slow down the pace of play and who want to put one center in the game at all times and another power forward that's not really a stretch four, but more of a true power forward, Ohio State is going to struggle. That's not really the case in this game for Minnesota in terms of how they like to play. So for that reason, I am going to take Ohio State to win this game, and I'm taking Ohio State to cover. I have placed some money on Ohio State -4.5. Placed it on BetMGM last night at -120. I think Ohio State will win this game by more than 5. I think Ohio State can win this game by 8 to 10 to 12 potentially. Again, be advised. I have been wrong on Ohio State all year. This is the first year I just haven't really understood this team. I feel like I understand them now. I think Ohio State can win. I think that they can cover. The only thing that makes me nervous, Ohio State has struggled to win at Minnesota, and it's a 9 o'clock game. It's or maybe 8 o'clock. It's either 8 or 9 o'clock. I think I have the answer right here if I unlock my phone. Yeah, it's a 9 o'clock game for Ohio State, so that doesn't really help. I believe the game is on FS1, by the way. All that to say, Minnesota, not a team that has impressed me. You look at the strength of schedule. You look at how bad the offense has been, even with the poor strength of schedule. Any real games they've played this year, they have not been good, and they have not covered in a single Big Ten game this season. So until Minnesota gives us a reason to believe in them, I'm going to believe in the team that Minnesota is playing. Maybe that's a trend that we should take on our side when it comes to taking just bets on games. But we don't do that here. We just talk about Ohio State basketball. I'm taking Ohio State to win. I'm taking Ohio State to cover. We will see. This game is going to get played at 9 o'clock. Here's the thing. I will not have a show, unfortunately, to recap this game unless it comes Wednesday. There's a chance of that, I guess. But due to some commitments, I'm not going to be able to get a show out late on Tuesday night. I'm also not going to be able to get a show out, late on Monday night. I'm also not going to be able to get a show out on Tuesday morning because I'm going to be out and about. So that said, you'll be without a recap show at least until Tuesday, maybe for the entire week until Ohio State plays before they play next, which is Oregon, I think, on Friday. The next time you hear from me may be that Ohio State and Oregon preview. Hopefully it goes similar to the Rose Bowl. We'll see, but Oregon's a good basketball team. Until then, though, make sure you're following on the socials. We've got a banger bet in, so we can root for that together tonight. And give a 5-star review of the show if you haven't already. Just because you can't get a gift card now doesn't mean you shouldn't still do it. Alrighty, I appreciate you listening to today's show. I think the Buckeyes will win this game. I think they will cover. We will see. We'll watch together and enjoy. Appreciate you listening again today.